Hello and welcome to the second video for your Make It New painting. My name is Eric, and today we're going to be talking about taking an underpainting and pushing it further. When I take a look at my underpainting compared to my source material here, there's some good things happening. Most of my colors are pretty close, but there's still some proportional issues. There's some value shifts I haven't placed yet. The biggest thing I see is that the skull is not large enough. The skull is quite small comparatively to my source material, just as far as compositional sizing. So I'll definitely be pushing my skull a little bit larger, and I'll be pushing some of the details, hopefully in the background, to maybe get it to an almost finished state. And then some of the stuff in the foreground as I continue to push detail. I am going to be working in a little bit of a smaller brush to start with, 1/2 inch flat here, and I'm going to be trying to make more accurate observations of my negative space at this point. My first painting, our first application here, I was going very quickly. I was trying to place things in and keep moving. But now I am going to try and get a little bit closer to what I actually am seeing. Keep in mind as you are approaching this painting, you do have to change something, and I would rather it not just be something very minimal in the background, but not so dramatic that you couldn't tell what painting you're looking at. Somewhere in that happy medium. I'm not sure what I'm going to be doing yet. I'm going to be trying to emulate this painting pretty similarly, and then be coming in the latter stages, trying to make a decision on what I'm going to be altering. I've been thinking a couple things, maybe throwing an alteration into the skull, maybe changing some of the fruit to something else. I had an idea of trying to put an iPad or something, some piece of technology, maybe on the cloth somewhere, to maybe confuse this space a little bit further. We'll see. I'm not sure yet. I'm going to keep it minimal, something that you have to find from further investigation of the piece. But once again, not something so minimal that it's just a shift in the background that I did a little bit differently. Don't get me wrong, if you gave me a rendition of a master's painting and it was basically spot on, I'd be pretty happy with that as well. But to get an interesting project here and to try and push those assignment parameters, do your best to make a successful shift. What you're thinking. So I'm kind of transferring back and forth between different colors here. I'm mixing most of my paint on the canvas rather than trying to mix new colors or anything like that. I am trying to be more accurate. So as I'm coming up to the skull, as I said, the skull is not large enough for my composition. I think what I'm going to do is kind of just not think about it. I'm going to omit it at this point, and then come back and just paint on top of my background, rather than trying to do any sort of shift right now. I think it's an important distinction. I think a lot of people want to come in and work that foreground really early, make sure that it's right. Because I know that it's small, I'm not even going to worry that it is going into the form a little bit here. I'm going to maybe try to be a little bit clean, but parts of it are already breaking in. Doesn't matter, because I am going to be coming back and resizing that element, that skull there. So going back and forth between darker and lighter values, I just added a little bit of water here. Water helps blend some of those more independent values. There's already something in the background that's a little bit too complicated for me to try and approach on this attempt. Some sort of floral, excuse me, leafy-like organic element. So I'm going to just try and paint the elements around it. As you can maybe see here, it's really not that complicated, but what I'm gonna do is probably just do this lighter value first, get this darker transition, do all this light value, and then when this dries a little bit more, I'll do some of this darker value on top as I continue to push. Try not to get yourself to that point too early where you're thinking, oh man, I'm putting in finished quality details. Try not to think of your painting that way. Just try to keep pushing it, and as you push it, eventually it will get to that point to where you're satisfied with an area and you can move on. But to go into a pass on a painting thinking, I'm going to finish the painting this time, unless it's very far into the process. Just let the painting sort of delegate what you do. Because sometimes you go in with a plan, things go better than you thought they were going to go, which is great. Or things go way worse or way just different. Maybe not better or worse, just different than how you perceive they would. And that's okay. That's sort of the beautiful thing about painting, is that it's organic. It can change halfway through and still be okay. You can still cover your tracks pretty well with a liquid medium like paint. Coming from drawing, not so much sometimes. Sometimes it's very difficult to rework an area after you reach saturation on a piece of paper. Or if you want to like bring back in a nice clean white area without bringing in a secondary medium into a negative space or something. There's always ways of doing it, but overall I think painting is a much more forgiving medium. So big horizontals the whole way. I'm not really worrying. I would rather they go a little bit into the fruit. I'm gonna have to paint that fruit anyway. Definitely a deep value. Almost like an outline here. I wonder what that was that he was trying to render there. Maybe just a light source or some minor room transition, because there's a little bit of a warmth coming out this side too. Almost seems like an afterthought. But maybe not. I feel like it does kind of balance the composition. I think if this was all just a darker area, you wouldn't engage the top right of that canvas very readily. Bringing the same or very similar tone as the skull helps bring your eye up to that space. So I'm sure it was intentional. And I am trying to get closer, but I'm not trying to get perfect yet. Whatever perfect is. Being totally satisfied with an area, I suppose. Little bits of water. It's very easy to get heavy-handed on that water, rely too much on it. Just little bits after you lay that paint down to help blend on top and create those softer transitions. All right, nice. Keep on moving. Remember, this isn't a completely finished quality, but for a second pass, I'm actually getting a good amount of these value shifts back here. They're kind of easier to see at this stage. A bit of water. Especially if you're getting low on a paint and you're not trying to remix another color. Sometimes that's one of the biggest frustrations in a painting, where you have that specific tone that you've been using and you're getting really close on using all of it. So a little bit of a lighter value here, kind of wraps around this warm bit. loose brush strokes. So getting pretty decent value transitions in the back here. I might try and push them a little bit further. But I'm actually pretty happy with what I've got going here. It's pretty dark there. So there's a little bit of a lighter transition in the background here. I might try and add that too. I think for now I'm just going to darken it out. And then when the time comes, I might add it back in. We'll see. And then there's the warm little bit there. I'm gonna make sure I include that. Start from a fairly clean brush here. Might be too heavy. We'll work it back out. So this blue-gray again. Push it back. And then a little water. Might have been too much. That's all right, I'll soften it out. If it gets too big, any sort of value shift, you can always pull it back a little bit with a little bit of the other color, especially if you're using a little bit of water to blend the space out. Now in that background area, I don't really want to develop too much of that vertical brush stroke. Maybe it's hard to see on the camera here, but I'll definitely come back in and just soften that out a little bit so that we're all in the same direction and we're not developing any sort of unwanted visual transition. And then this space back here actually has more detail in it than I realized. I think I'm just going to take a first pass on it though. Getting a little bit closer. Not stressing about it. It does have a little bit of that darker value in it though. Mixing in. Creating that transition. And then we're looking pretty good. A little bit light in there, but I like the contrast. I like that it's pulling my vision back to that space. I'll just bring a little bit of that darker background tone in as well to try and break that space up a little bit further. This one dried too quickly. Add a little bit more of that warmer tone. Okay, not a bad background. Maybe adding a little bit more in here. Just remember, you can always add more. You can always pull it back. Painting is very forgiving like that. Okay, so last thing I want to do on this video, and then I'll put you in fast forward and be sort of refining everything as I'm moving. Maybe bring you back for the one change that I do, is reshape that skull. Because I'm going to show you how to reshape a space here. So the background is decently spaced out, and now I need to think how I'm going to redo this skull. I could come in and I could sketch it again. That's always an option, and I think if you're really nervous about a space, not a big issue. You can come back in, you can try and sketch it back in, if that helps you see what you're working with. I'm going to use the space in my composition here to try and help me size in, and I'm just going to go with paint. So the main way, it wasn't really the comparison between the skull and the fruit, because some of the fruit might actually need some enlarging as well, which is fine. It was actually the negative space on the top of the composition, and then if I were to cut this composition in half, seeing that the skull is almost to a half, and when I do this here, it's not quite there. So just taking a couple measurements, realizing it's definitely going to be taller. It's definitely going to be A little bit wider on that side. And then, as I said, I think this orbital bone here is going to be pushing closer to center of my composition. So I get myself a few marks here, and then I'm just going to sort of come in. Luckily, I already have a pretty good start on the skull, so it's not like I'm just coming in fresh. Sometimes bringing in a completely new space can be difficult. But here I am going to add even a little bit of white to also help block that out. If my color goes wrong because I had to block out with opacity, then I'm just going to have to come in and do another pass. I like to block out with a white sort of yellow mixture. Some yellows are more opaque than others. I find that cad yellow is pretty good. Okay, coming in, maybe mix it down to a little bit of a warmer tone. There's definitely a shadow on this side too. This is pushing out further, coming down, and then that orbital is pushing further. And then come back in. Reduce some of that yellow, find that a little bit of a darker value. Pull this in a little bit of a darker. Just come straight across. So maybe the features need to be a little bit larger too. Yeah, I'd say for sure. Yeah, we're gonna have to enlarge in some features. But I'm really just trying to block out what I got and see what my new skull looks like. Trying to place it in on that second pass. I might try and make a few more observations of detail and value. Like this is much lighter on the other side of that divot there in the temple. And it's a little bit darker. Maybe pull some of this even behind it. Pull them back. Soften it back up. So once again, I am looking for more detail on this second pass, but I'm not really trying to get anywhere near a finished quality. I'm really just interested in making sure I get those proportions a little bit more accurate to work into. So a little bit better, grab just a smaller brush and refine this a little bit, just a little bit more. Okay, coming up, this is much larger, much closer to the edge. I'd say the eye is almost to here. This is more significant in this space. So the nose actually pokes forward here and obscures the eye hole. And goes back up. A little bit of water sometimes added, especially in a darker value, can help it act a little bit more like ink, be a little less blotchy. So I'm gonna have to come in with that highlight. That's gonna help a lot. This eye is very low, so I'm actually gonna have to repaint some of that space. But it's gonna be closer to this on the top side. Come back down to there. And then, as I said, I'm not really going to clean my brush here. I just want to pull a little bit of this there so I can see that that eye isn't quite that size. I'm just looking for proportions right now. Nose coming in too. Like I said, I will have to add a little bit of this nose bone to obscure one of those eyes, but it's coming down. Nasal cavity comes out. The little bone comes up. And I have a decent space. Not perfect. But if it's too large in certain areas, which it absolutely is, coming back, I'm not trying to perfectly render that space, I'm just trying to block it out so I know what I'm looking at this is absolutely coming here, then coming over this eye, and then coming back down. White was a little too dramatic. I'll add just a little bit of yellow to it to even it out. Highlight pushes this way. Oh, still too much black. So I'm going to continue to push this. Second pass, it's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be closer. My next pass I'll get a little closer. Next pass I'll get even a little closer. Remember, I would rather do many thin layers than try to knock it out in one thick layer and run into issues with thickness of paint and unmixed, unsupported value. Many thin layers works better. Push that a little bit further. Okay, so I made the skull a little bit larger, more significant within the composition. The more I'm looking at it, this is too large, so I'm gonna have to push that back a little bit. Even when I bring in areas from the background, yeah, that's about right. Coming down. Added a little bit too much water on that, but we're just gonna block it out. Get it closer, because this is a little bit large too. And we're getting closer. Slow, gradual transitions, getting your painting better. So it took me a little bit, but I got the proportions of this skull more accurate. I softened out the background that I had to take back in because I actually made it too large. I can even then add a little bit more if that's drawing too much attention. Little transitions, little bits of white, little bits of water to soften it back out. But there we go. So skull's looking better. Not perfect yet, but better than it was. It's holding a better space. The background's getting closer as well. I'm going to continue to push all of these, and then once I get the painting to a fairly satisfied spot where I'm happy with it, I am going to be thinking about what I'm going to be altering or changing in this painting. You could do it a little bit earlier if you wanted to, if you knew you were going to change something in the fruit, or if you knew you were going to add something. But I'm going to wait. I'm going to wait until the probably like the 5-yard line to add just one thing after I try to emulate this painting fairly closely.